Thanks, Hannah, and welcome. My name is Amy Herbert, and I am a human behavior specialist at Accenture. I am very recently SSAP certified, so super excited to share that news here today. Thank you, thank you. A couple fast facts about me is I am a mom of 3, and personally, I like it cold.
And I'm Jen, and I am currently the innovation portfolio lead on our security team. I am a mom of 2 and 3 if you count my fur baby Xavier. Shout out to him. And I like it hot, although I'm starting to change my mind given how hot it's been in Virginia the last few days. I would rather be a little bit colder than this.
So Jen and I, along with our managing director, who's up here in the front, Ursula, we all work for a company called Accenture. So Accenture, just as a little background, has about 750,000 employees worldwide, and we serve 9,000 clients in 120 plus countries. Now, Jen and I, our job at Accenture is pretty unique. We run the Information Security Awareness Program for our 750,000 internal employees. So what that means is we get to launch really exciting, innovative, lots of different types of security awareness trainings for our internal employees so they can experience it firsthand, establish what works well for them, and then take it out to our clients all around the world. So today, what we're gonna do to get started, since it's the first session of the day, I want everyone to take a big good morning stretch, and I want everyone to imagine a snowflake. Now, I know imagining a snowflake here in Virginia may be hard, but I want everyone to try. Now, I want everyone to imagine this snowflake falling from the sky. Each of its crystalline arms is of natural design, blooming with potential. This snowflake falling represents a great idea. It has innovation, promise, and uniqueness. Now, for all of you imagining, I want you to imagine this snowflake now landing in the heart of a blazing desert, or landing outside here on the hot streets of Virginia. The hot, humid culture makes the snowflake unable to withstand the heat around it. Despite the snowflake's potential to bring chill to the much needed desert or the streets here of Virginia, it is unable to withstand the environment, the culture around it, right? It dissolves as soon as it hits the sand or as soon as it hits the pavement here. So for those of you that are imagining, I want you to now open your eyes and look at the screen in front of you. This image is the crux of what we're going to be talking about today. This image of the snowflake in the desert, this is representing the need for an idea to flourish. It has to be surrounded by the right culture, right? A snowflake would never be able to survive in the desert, just as some of our ideas for security awareness may not be able to flourish or survive in the cultures of the company that each of us work at. So today, what we are going to do is we are going to make sure that each of you are aware of A, your company culture, and then B, of the ideas that you can implement within that culture in order to be successful. So let's take a quick poll. So when we think back to that idea of the snowflake, how many of you guys have ever had this amazing idea, right? You've had that snowflake, beautiful idea, but you've launched it at the wrong time or into the wrong culture at your company, and it just falls flat. Anybody here in the room have an idea like that? I see some hands. Thank you for sharing. We've had ideas like that too at Accenture. And so it's not that the idea is bad, it's that the time that you released it into wasn't the right time. So again, the takeaway here is the idea itself can be great, but any idea can fail if it is released at the wrong time or into the wrong culture. So Jen and I are going to walk you through a culture assessment a little bit later today that will help you identify the culture of your company, right? Do you live in a company where those snowflakes are going to flourish and they're going to mound up and there is going to be this excitement about the pending snow? Or are you guys working at a company and a culture that really needs to bring ideas that are grains of sand, that are hot and exciting, and you have to come to it with that type of mindset in order to be successful and to succeed? So we'll get to that assessment in just a minute. But before we do, I want to remind everyone that it is not your job as a security awareness professional to change the culture at your company. Rather, it is your job to assess the culture at your company and to make sure that your security awareness interventions are aligning with the company culture that you are working at. So again, it's not our job to change the culture, but rather to assess it and align strategies to that culture. But before we dive into all of that and get started on the assessment, I really want to talk just a little bit more about culture. So Jen, what is culture?
Well, good thing you ask. And actually, I'm excited to talk about this because I've heard there's been so many talks and mentions of culture, which is pretty exciting for people that are really into the topic and are presenting about it. So, I think it's a good tie-in. So we all know what organizational culture is, but for the purposes of what we're going to talk about, let's kind of set a common definition. You may have heard it described as the way we do things around here or a company's personality. But the importance of what we really want to talk about today is how does culture direct how people think and work? It establishes risk tolerances, which is important in the line of work that we're in, right? It sets attitudes and behaviors. It's really in the behavior that we permit and the attitudes that we promote. And I think one of the things that everyone probably in the room also knows is that culture is everyone's responsibility, and it's really hard to change, which is why it's important to bear it in mind when designing our security awareness strategies, right? Because, as Amy was talking about, you can have the best laid out plan and design for a program, but if it just doesn't fit the culture, it's not going to land well. And I kind of liken this to, when you're hiring someone new, that person can have all the right skills, have a education that you're looking for, check all the boxes. But if they don't fit within your organization's culture, or maybe they don't like the culture, and don't think they fit in, it's probably not going to work. You're not going to get the performance you want. That person's going to leave. And so when we think about that, we really need to, again, remember when we're building strategies and security awareness programs, what do we need to know about what our culture is and how we can build a program that fits in that already established culture? So as we move on, we'll talk about what are some key identifiers of culture. And we think about this in sort of we've talked about a common definition, but let's talk about observable actions and practices so that we can get a sense of, okay, well, what is my culture? How do I, measure it? So we've broken it down into 3 dimensions. So starting with decision-making style, moving to the right, communication and collaboration, and then risk tolerance. And we'll spend just a couple minutes, diving into each of these. So starting with decision-making style, is your organization more centralized, hierarchical, has a formal structure, right? Or are employees more involved and give input into decisions? Are there formal procedures in place? Are rules and established kind of top down, or are, again, employees involved in that process? So moving to communication and collaboration, who does the communication in your organization, right? Does it come from that top down leadership? What's the style of communications and how often are they put out? Are they more informal? Or is there an exchange of ideas again, or is it more of just that top-down communication from leadership? And is there a feedback loop? Is there a way, a vehicle in which employees can provide feedback back on how they think things should be changed? And then lastly, risk tolerance. So, is your organization, how do they feel about risk taking? What are their attitudes around it? Do they embrace change? Do they encourage people to innovate and try new things and cutting edge technology that maybe isn't tried and true just yet? Are failures looked at as learning opportunities and not necessarily a negative experience? So now that we've talked about sort of this model of how we can measure culture, let's talk about how these might show up in a security awareness program, which is relevant to us. So do important security updates come from your top-down leadership, right? Is that messaging always from, your CISO or your CEO? Or is that dialogue, a collaborative process where people are exchanging ideas? I'm sure everyone in the room does have mandatory policy training. Many of you all probably run that training. But do you do continuous learning throughout the year? Or is it just kind of a once and done type of thing, right? There's always emerging threats and things that we need to be telling people about, so is there that ongoing learning? And again, are past security failures used in learning, right? Or does your company shy away from that and not want to bring attention to that? All of these things can help us decide, do I exist in a culture that's more risk tolerant or not? So now that we've given the framework, what we want to do is really have you guys get a chance to apply what we've talked about.
Yes. So on everybody's table, if you guys look around, there should be a handout that looks like this. It's a quick quiz, a quick assessment. So if everyone can pass those around the table, there are plenty on other tables if you're sitting at a more full table. But if everyone can just take a minute and grab the handout, what we're going to do is we're going to allow some time in the room here today for each of you to assess the culture, right? To assess that of environment. So again, back to that snowflake idea, what is the environment that you are launching your ideas into? So on the first part of that assessment, you'll see the section for decision-making style, like Jen just described. So we're going to give everybody about a minute to go through this decision-making style assessment. Just quickly think about the company you're working at now and what end of that spectrum are you living on, right? So the decision-making style at your company, how are decisions typically made at your organization? Are they centralized? Are they decentralized? So on and so forth. So I'll give everybody a little bit of time to complete this assessment. So go ahead and get started, and then we'll come back together, review the results, and talk about how you can really drive change using this information, using the culture at your company in order to make the best decisions.
See, we have a hanging D. There's an alignment problem on our slides too.
Oh, and I should also mention to our friends on Slack, this assessment is pinned in the resources channel. So if there are comments coming in saying, how can I participate in this assessment as well? If you go to the resources section of Slack, this is pinned at the top there. So you can participate in this as well. So please go for all of our friends in Slack and make sure that you are pulling this down so that you can participate in the next section. For those of you in the room, if you haven't moved on to that second section of communication and collaboration, just a little time check. We're about halfway through the time we've allocated towards the assessment. So make sure that you are at least on question 4. How often do employees have opportunities to collaborate and work together on projects and initiatives? Is that happening very rarely or very often at your company? And then again, we're going to allow about 1 more minute here. So if you haven't moved on to that risk tolerance section, just a little time check, make sure that you are circling questions there. This section starts with the question, how comfortable is your organization with taking risks and trying new approaches? Are they risk adverse or are they risk tolerant? So about 30 more seconds to complete the assessment. All of our friends on Slack, hopefully you found it. We'll come back together and chat. All right. So now what I want you to do is I want you to look at where your circles fell on your chart. If you have more answers on the left-hand side, we're going to classify your organization for the sake of today's conversation as a cold culture. Do you remember back to that image? It's the image where the mountains, the snow is succeeding. If you have more circles on the right-hand side, for the sake of today's conversation, we are going to classify your company's culture as a hot culture, right? Those ideas that are grains of sand. So when we think about the difference between a hot and a cold culture, reminder, neither is good or bad, and it is not your job to change it. It is just your job to release the best ideas possible into the culture. Our cold culture friends, you may notice that your culture is more cautious, more process driven, a little bit more stable and consistent, often resistant. They run when they see me as the change manager coming anywhere near their department, right? So our hot culture friends, for those of you that have more circles on the right-hand side of the page, you may define your culture as very creative, risk-taking, agile, and innovative. But often a lot of the ideas that you have at your company may be hard to sustain, right? So if we think back to some of the presentations that we heard yesterday, when David from Sans Serif was talking, he was talking about those 7 motivating factors. Does everyone remember that presentation from yesterday? When he was talking, I was really thinking about how does motivation play into each of these cultures. And he mentioned the idea of self-motivation in competition. And when I think of our cold culture, they really are self-motivated, right? They are the ones that are going to complete the trainings manually. They are going to hold themselves accountable. Where our hot culture friends may lean more into the motivation style of competition. They want to see leaderboards. They want to be engaged with each other when they are learning and when they are doing security awareness trainings. So in order to build on this a little bit more, not as well as motivating factors, but also some of the strategies that Jen and I have both used at Accenture and with clients that we have worked at, we want to dive in a little bit to the behavior intervention strategies that we have used with success in each of these cultures. So for my cold culture friends, my cold culture friends are normally from highly regulated areas, maybe like our friends yesterday that presented at Sans. Everyone remembers Tony, right? So these cultures are often insurance company, banking, law type companies. When we think about our cold cultures, strategies for success in your behavior awareness program that you may want to consider include posters, right? Now, when I worked at a cold culture and I was like, posters, I was like, I feel like I've evolved beyond posters, right? Like there has to be a better idea out there than posters. But I really had outstanding success by launching a different poster every month that went on a campaign. We talked about MFA, we talked about what you share on Facebook. Every month we changed out that poster. And someone may walk by this poster 5 or 6 times without ever stopping. But that 7th time that they walk by and it catches their eye, everyone in our cold culture, a lot of people, I shouldn't say everyone, in our cold culture, they want to read learning versus watching learning, right? They want to do it on their own time. They are self-motivated to ingest that information. So up here, I do have that online security tips. That is an infographic that I made off of Canva. So if anyone is working in a cold culture and hasn't invested in that premier Canva account, I highly, highly encourage it. It allows you to create really interesting infographics and posters that you can get information out in an interesting, creative, bold way without being as talented as this graphic designer that's actively working behind me. So other things that I have found really successful in cold cultures include emails from authority figures. And these emails lead with what is in it for me, right? What is in it for the person that is reading this email? So let's break that down. It starts with a header that says, why are we making this change, right? So often I argue with our tech team all the time because they never want to disclose the why. half the time because the why is we're saving money, or, you know, this program's out of date, right? But let's really talk about what the true why is. We're becoming safer. We're seeing more attacks in the world. This is coming in through abnormal, and now we're making abnormal as a security program that will assess your real-time threats that are coming in. So this is coming in through abnormal. We see that deepfakes are becoming more and more popular. So here's the information that we are going to send out to you, right? Why are we sending it out? It's becoming more and more relevant, and we want you to be safe, not only here at work, but also in your personal life. So it starts with that why, that what's in it for me, and it is signed by an authority figure. It's signed by your CISO, it's signed by your CEO. It is not signed by, thank you, security awareness team, right? It is not signed by, it is not sent from a masked account, right? Security awareness programming at yourcompany.com. They want to see that your authority figures, that your leaders at your company are in lockstep with the communication that you are sending out. So I write a ton of ghost emails for our CISO in order to make sure that it's, you know, coming from him, we're aligned on the content, in order to make sure that that is a relevant strategy. So other things that we think about is for success in this culture is non-flashy recognition. So up there, that CyberSit brick is when I worked at a beverage company. I was consulting with a beverage company. So the SIP, the Security Awareness Program, leaned into their culture of being a beverage company. And so every time someone in the organization passed all of their quarterly phishing tests, we test once a month. So if you passed all of that quarter's test, you got a brick, a Lego brick, in order to build your own human security firewall, right? So you are building your own wall. It sits on your desk as a really cool point of recognition. It's not overly flashy, it's not a trophy, but again, it was a self-motivated sense of pride that each of the people in this cool culture could assess. They came in lots of different colors. It was always a contest in the office as to what were you building with your Lego bricks and how many did you have? So it was just a really fun strategy that we were able to have success with. And then finally, I want to talk about some more passive strategies. If you don't have the budget to necessarily buy Lego bricks, we have done in the moment nudges, again, that people can read and not watch. And so two examples of those are we often switch out our screensavers. So when you finally close out the 9 billion windows that you may have open, there's a new screensaver there, so it catches your attention. So we're able to change the imaging within each of the computers to have that stock image be something that we can push out. And so it's able to say, here are the focuses of the month. Maybe these images also match the posters around the office, right? So there's this connection to like, wait, I saw that on my computer, and I also saw that on my way to the water cooler. Like, maybe this is important, and I should pause and think about it for a second, right? And then the final tool that I have up there is something that we use called red flags. It's a vendor that we partner with. And so anytime that they're going to a website or they get an email from an outside source, a quite literal red flag will pop up and say, are you sure you want to click on this link? It's from an outside source. Or if I go to ChatGPT on my computer, it says, reminder, this is open source AI. Don't enter anything that's company sensitive information. So again, they're reading that information and it is in the moment application. It is not something that I am learning and then applying later. So again, these are some really successful strategies for our cold cultures. So now in order to talk about our hot cultures, I'm going to pass it over to Jen.
All right. So if we think about hot culture, what are the type of companies that might fall into this? And I think, think of the marketing companies, the technology companies, the startups, and Accenture falls into this bucket, right? And, we've really been able to do some cool stuff because of our innovative culture. You can see some GIFs or GIFs, depending on how you say that word, on the slide of some stuff that we've been able to create in virtual reality and augmented reality, which I'll talk about in a second. And really that stuff was well embraced in our culture. And our program's been established for about 10 years now, I think we're going on, right? So we have a pretty established program. But when we started out, we were putting out kind of that one size fits all type of training across our huge global audience. Again, 750,000 people across the globe doing very different type of work. And what we realized is that we really needed to personalize that content. A lot of Accenture, most of Accenture's workforce they're working on client projects, right? So they're living in their client's culture and organization more than Accenture's because they spend, all week there. Um, and so we had to think about that, and we had to think about how do we create bite-sized content on the go for the majority of our workforce. And so the other thing that we had to think about is with a company the size of ours and the global nature of it is there's many cultures within, right? We have our general organizational culture within Accenture, but then there's cultures within. So like what works for legal, our legal function, might not work for our client delivery folks. If we think about legal and lawyers, stereotype, not all lawyers, but they like rules and procedures and policies, right? And so in that realm, it might be easy enough to send a note to say, hey, you need to finish your, training or you're not going to be compliant. That's likely going to get their attention. That's just how they're wired, right? But for our client delivery folks who are, again, spending all their time on a client and aren't necessarily paying attention to compliance training emails from Accenture, that's not going to work. So how do we get their attention? We've done a lot of different things over the years to do that. And a lot of it is establishing a brand where we are producing content that's engaging and interactive and fun. It's not the traditional boring compliance training that people are used to that they're just clicking through. And so over the years, we've built this brand where it's like people are seeking out our content, showing it to their kids at home, which is great. A lot of the information that we put out is applicable to families. We want people to take that home and apply it in their own lives. Totally. Right? So that's kind of how we've looked at, sort of our mini cultures within. Another thing that we've done because of our geographic nature is we've got security leads that are kind of assigned to each of our big geographic markets, right? So we call them data privacy and information security leads, otherwise known as DPIS leads. These people are really responsible for taking our information, our package of training, our communication templates, our, kits, cybersecurity kits, and deploying them out to their local areas, within their local offices, the way it's going to work for them in existing, leveraging existing comm channels that they know works. And by the way, they're also held responsible to do that, right? So they're held to a certain metric for their geographic unit that, a certain percentage of people complete that training. And that's kind of, how we just sort of have structured their role. And so if we talk about, again, hot culture ideas and some of the things that we've done, a few years ago, we kind of went on this journey to the metaverse, which again, you can see Cybertron and some other of our characters on the slide. So we built virtual reality training, right? So think of wearing an Oculus headset, you've got fish flying at you, like actual fish flying at you. And in order to, get rid of those fish, you've got to correctly identify the fishing indicators. Right, really cool and interactive training that people really enjoyed. We talked about escape rooms yesterday. We built a Mystery Mansion escape room within VR, so an immersive sort of situation where teams can compete against each other to solve these different security puzzles. Really, really cool. We have an augmented reality app that people can download to their phone, and the idea behind this is to really teach them how to be, because of the nature of our workforce, how to be safe with security at home, in the office, or your client office, right? And so we've got augmented reality built into that and superimposed. Cybertron is actually the character, the guy doing this in that app. But I will say that with some of those specific strategies, again, going back to how does that fit in with our culture, very much fits in with our innovative culture, but what we found pretty much right away is that it's not sustainable, right? It's hard, as much as we'd love to buy everyone, 750,000 people an Oculus headset, can't really do that. And so we had to pivot and really figure out, okay, well, where do we target, where do we deploy this information and this type of learning that we know people want? And so we added it to what we call our Cyberfest, which Amy leads. These are local office events where we bring people together. We put them through a series of fun games like data classification mini golf and a spin to win game, which you see also on the slide, like the Wheel of Fortune. We take them, we allow them the opportunity to put a headset on and take them through the virtual reality training. And we've seen a lot of success from that. And both, because it gives people the chance to, again, our culture is collaborative, to get together in person, get through that learning together. Also, the grassroots nature of it. This isn't something that our CEO or our CISO said, hey, we think you need to do this. This was a grassroots effort that really grew over time, where our security advocates and champions across the globe, they take ownership of it. They plan these events. Amy and the team, go out to support them where they can, but it's really those local offices that, take that on, which also helps intrinsically motivate people to be more, to think about security and bring it into their day-to-day. So that's some of the stuff that we've done. Also gamification, I should mention. Accenture is a culture of type A personalities, mostly. We are a competitive environment, right? So most of our stuff has a gamification lens to it. We have leaderboards, we have competitions. I mentioned those DPIS leads, our security leads in each of our geographic markets. We have competitions amongst the different geographies. In fact, a few years ago, it was around the time of the Olympics, we did an Olympics challenge. That's the one thing that, kind of spans across the globe. And so we did a campaign around that. And so we really just try to, make sure that we're including those local leads and infusing gamification where we can. Now, if we were in maybe one of the cold cultures that Amy was talking about, maybe a competition like that wouldn't work and it would actually have the opposite effect, so things to think about. Another thing I wanted to mention is that we've recently been exploring Gen AI, which I know most of the room is next door learning about that.
So thank you for being here.
Yeah, but we've really been leaning into this on my team, and we think of it in two ways. Like, how can we build training content? That's what we do for the masses of Accenture. So how can we leverage the AI technology to do that better, faster, cheaper? But also knowing that we're the security team, how do we do that in a safe way and make sure that people are using it responsibly?
So in order to wrap us up and make sure that we do have some time for questions, just want to leave you with 3 tips. No matter if your culture is hot and that grain of sand or cold like the snowflake, we always want you to make sure that you are taking your ideas to an advisory board, whether it be a DPIS, others in your department, your personal network, and just making sure before you invest in launch it, make sure that the idea is going to be sustainable in the culture at your company. 2, we want you to regularly assess strategies, right? A year from now, I want everyone to put on their Outlook calendar, a reminder, an all-day reminder, right? Reassess strategies. Are the things I'm doing today the same things I need to be doing tomorrow? And finally, challenge the culture quo, right? Just because that you're living in a cold culture doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities to inject hot ideas, right? Maybe you're doing a security awareness project for the marketing team and you can bring some more gamification or competition elements. Or if you're in a hot culture, like a poster is never a bad idea, right? So thinking about when can you challenge the quo? While we did have it on a spectrum on that slide, I really want you guys to think of it to more of a Venn diagram, right? There's always going to be overlap. There's always going to be opportunities to flow between the two. It's just a matter of challenging it at the appropriate time. So with that, we are going to open it up for questions. Jen and I are also around all day and happy to chat. I do see a question up here in the front, but if there's an opportunity to start on Slack, go for it.
Everybody give a round of applause for Jen and Amy.